Thanks for coming to join us. Today, it's going to be quite exciting. We're going to talk. This is going to be the third part of the series of talk so far. Today's seminar obviously is going to be on Saudi Arabia, a giant reawaken. Before we start, again introduce our esteemed speaker for the day, Dr. Clements. For those that didn't know or did not know before, he's a leading expert at the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. This region, over the last 2 decades, Saudi Arabia has undergone a massive transformation. Primarily once known for its vast oil reserve, the kingdom is now reinventing itself through ambitious Vision 2030 initiative. The journey of economic diversification, social reform, and cultural modernization has reshaped the country and has placed it at the center of global attention. Today, we're going to explore some of these changes in depth. We will also look at some of the pivotal moments and strategic decisions that have shaped the country and awakened this giant. Today's topic is going to be valuable and exciting as well. And hopefully you will provide valuable insight into the future of Saudi Arabia and also its role on the global stage. With that, I will have Dr. Clements share with us some of his insights. Dr. Clements.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming down. This is our third session of the ME 101 series that we have collaborated with SUSS. And we have 3 more installments this series. The remaining one will be Israel's startup. That's one. We have one on renewables, EVs. And the final session, the closing session, will be delivered by Mr. Bilahari Kausikan. So we have 3 sessions left in total for the series. We are now midway, and today's program and today's presentation is on Saudi Arabia, a giant awaken, and we talk about the changes. We will talk about the changes, socioeconomic, but also we can't obviously ignore the political changes in Saudi Arabia, which of course engendered and spurred on the economic and social reforms in the kingdom. So I will begin by saying why, or telling you why it's awakened. So first photo of a landscape in purple. You would think that most of the time when we think about lavender fields, we think about France and Provence. But this is in Saudi Arabia, in the desert landscape, where they have been promoting this area in the north since 2021. It's called Al Juf province. And if you move on to the next slide again, you'll see that this is actually a more realistic view of the landscape in the north. Of course, in Saudi Arabia, there's still much work to be done in terms of developing the whole kingdom because it's a huge country compared to its neighbors. If you want to talk about population-wise, you have the nationals in terms of the nationals to non-nationals ratio. In the UAE, you have about 11% Emiratis and the rest are foreigners or expats. But in Saudi Arabia, the ratio is closer to 58 to 42. And you have the nationals 50 being on the 58, the slightly marginally bigger national population in Saudi Arabia. So again, we see the landscape on your screen, which are the lavender fields in the desert landscape. And this also was tied in when they tried to promote Al Juf province in line with the change of the ceremonial carpet colors in Saudi Arabia. So the traditional color for carpets, for ceremonial carpets in Saudi Arabia is red. But in 2021, they changed it from red to lavender or purple to mark also and to promote their nation's heritage. Right, and again, in the north of Tabuk, you see a wintry landscape in the winter months, and this will be used to host the 2029 Asian Winter Games. So you see also there's really an initiative to take on mega events, and you will have the Riyadh Expo by 2030. And so these are some of the marketing, I guess, or the PR that Saudi Arabia has been doing to allow people to understand that they have diverse landscapes and they have much to offer, especially when they started rolling out the tourist visas in 2019, which was unfortunately hit by COVID for a couple of years. And then the tourism, the number of visitors, of course, went skyrocketed ever since. So the outline of my presentation, which I hope will be around 30 minutes to 40 minutes, and we'll try to keep streamline things so that we can take more questions instead, is, of course, we've talked about an awakening in the kingdom. We cannot talk about the economic awakening without the political changes within the kingdom. And so I will start with a brief overview of the political changes in the kingdom since 2015. And then this will be followed by the economic changes, the economic policies, and the vision for the future. And of course, if you have been reading the news, then Vision 2030 comes up a lot when you talk about Saudi Arabia. So the map. I think if you look at this map, I think the first thing you would notice is that Saudi Arabia is comparatively, compared to its neighbors, larger and much larger than its neighbors. If you look at on the right of your screen, you have Oman and United Arab Emirates, and of course you have a very small portion there to Qatar, just above the United Arab Emirates. You have Kuwait a bit to the northeast, but then you have the colored portion, of course, being Saudi Arabia. And I mentioned that a lot of these significant changes are occurring in the urban belt of Saudi Arabia, which means running from Jeddah on the west and through Medina and Riyadh, of course, the capital city, all the way to Dammam on the east side and Kobat. So the urban belt is where significant amount of changes are occurring, and which also prompts a lot of internal migration, meaning that people on what we call the peripheries coming in to the urban core for employment, to live, and to search for new homes. And also to have a rough idea of the kind of population density. Again, on the urban belt, you see on the smaller box to the right of your screen, you see the dark red areas being primarily in the middle portion of the map. And the numbers, of course, reflect the number of inhabitants in these areas. Now, we talk about the political changes, but we need to talk about the kind of narrative that Saudi Arabia is trying to roll out, the changes that the kingdom is trying to market itself and profile itself to globally. And if you talk about history, the political history of the kingdom, there are 3 Saudi states, and the first one from 1744 was marked by an alliance, or a religious political alliance, between a cleric and a ruler. So it was between Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab and Muhammad bin Saud, where one was, through this alliance, one was asked to govern, and the other one was to provide religious legitimacy. And that's how, Wahhabism, when we talk about Saudi Arabia, has all along been synonymous, but this has since changed. And that's why in the slide, I put a new twist to it, because if you look at some of the statements being rolled out by the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, he has dropped this ultra-conservative version of Islam, Wahhabism, and promoted a more moderate version of the religion. Okay, I'll just briefly talk about this interview that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman gave on Al Arabiya. And the notion is that, he says that Islam has to keep up with the times. So no longer is Wahhabism, the valid version for today's era, because he has to keep up with the demands of people today. And of course, this is meant to reflect the kind of modernization that the kingdom would like to embrace.
المدرسة الشيخ محمد عبد الوهاب هي التي ستفسر هذا القرآن وهذه الأحاديث.
طويل العمر، احنا متى ما زلنا نفسنا بمدرسة معينة أو بعالم معين معناته ألهنا البشر. الله سبحانه وتعالى والرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يضع الله سبحانه وتعالى بينه وبين الناس حجاب، أنزل قرآنه والرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم طبقه على الأرض والاجتهاد مفتوح للأبد. والشيخ محمد الوهاب لو خرج من قبره ووجدنا نلتزم بنصوصه ونغلق عقولنا للاجتهاد ونؤلهه أو نضخمه لأول من عارض هذا الشيء، فلا يوجد مدرسة.
Right. Okay. So you've just seen that snippet from the interview that the Crown Prince gave to Al Arabiya, and you saw that he says that Wahhabism has to keep up with the times. When it was conceived or when the religio-political alliance was done, 1744, it was for that time. So religious text and interpretation, well, not interpretation, but the version of moderate version of Islam should be in line with our times and also in line with the demands of society. And despite this, the levels of religiosity in Saudi Arabia, if you look at the surveys and if you look at the work by Mark Thompson, for example, who has written extensively on young Saudi males, you realize that religion still forms a very important part of social life, and the levels of religiosity has been consistently high. And what can also be said is that religious tourism still forms a major part of Saudi Arabia's tourism. It has traditionally been about 20% of GDP, and they are trying to incorporate non-religious tourism together with the religious tourism that they have always been getting the receipts from Hajj, the Hajj pilgrimage and the lesser pilgrimage, the Umrah, over the decades. So on this slide, we talked about the first Saudi state. I'm going to just skip the second part of the second Saudi state and talk about the modern kingdom, which was forged by Abdulaziz ibn Abdul Rahman al Saud, who is more commonly known as Ibn Saud. And he captured Riyadh in 1902, and then his conquest for expansion, relied also on religious ruling, or a fatwa, as you call it. And eventually he declared his realm the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932. But the whole point about Ibn Saud is to highlight the fact that religio-political alliance until this time remained valid. And it would remain valid for until, of course, 2015 to 2017, when further changes were made in the kingdoms. I'm not going to delve deeply into the style, the governance styles, or the kinds of the achievements of each monarch. But I want to highlight the fact that in Saudi Arabia, the succession trend has been horizontal, meaning that the kings that have come after Ibn Saud have been his sons. So it goes along a horizontal line. And it's only recently that we are thinking of succession towards the next generation, which is the current crown prince, who belongs to the next generation. In 2015, since King Salman, the current king, has taken over, we have seen numerous political changes, notably the fact that the current crown prince sort of maneuvered his way into a primary position to succeed the throne. And we've seen more assertive foreign policy, which includes the Yemen war, and also the restructuring of government bodies. So if you haven't caught wind of this book called MBS, The Rise of Power of Mohammed bin Salman, this is a really accessible book that actually is written in pretty accessible language to understand the events that led to his rise and how he positioned and maneuvered his way to the crown prince position. But since his unexpected rise also came with his father's, because his father was actually the 25th son out of 36 of Ibn Saud. And his position, the crown prince position, initially was in charge of the crown prince court when he wasn't crown prince. And of course, he then orchestrated his way to be in line for succession, and he remains crown prince, and he has been prime minister since 2022, I believe. And he has shaken up both the clerical or the religious side of things. He curbed the powers of the religious police, and he initiated a clerical shakeup. He reined in the religious figures, and of course, as you saw earlier in the clip, he promotes a moderate version of Islam. So the last point here being wither the Allegiance Council. The Allegiance Council is a council which groups senior princes to achieve a kind of consensus for the line of succession, for the next ruler to come in. And so he has, of course, brought the house in order in the Allegiance Council to, of course, again, position himself to take over next. And there were reports of house arrests of other princes. If you look simply at Reutus, you will see that he has brought his house in order, and he has successfully positioned himself for the throne. And also that means, that translates into a centralization of power. But more importantly, now that we have covered most of that political changes, what kind of policies does he roll out? I think that's the more important question when you talk about the Crown Prince's vision. And you see a Saudi first policy. So even if you talk about foreign policy and regional policy, he would say that whatever that I'm doing outside of the kingdom, I do it out of national interest. I do it so that the kingdom will benefit. So you see a sense of rising nationalism. We see a negotiating of a social contract, because he is promoting or supporting or answering, in fact, the demands of the youth, which form a huge part of the population, Saudi population. And if you look at some of the images, the two images on this slide, you realize at the bottom is Riyadh, which is the site of the first Saudi state, the capital. And they have remodeled it into an open-air historical museum where you can visit. And I've been there, and it's excellent, and they have descriptors all over the place. You can walk around the site and take in historical snippets. And there's also, of course, retail and restaurants, also for hospitality, serving hospitality, and also catering for domestic tourism. And the second interesting thing I wanted to point out was, of course, the Foundation Day. I think that the whole narrative about, we spoke earlier about the religious political alliance that happened in 1744. And there was a shift to mark the Foundation Day away from the day of the religious political alliance. Again, changing narrative and shifting the kind of narrative that the kingdom wants to put on its local population. We have a second clip here, again, to outline the vision before I go into the nitty-gritty.
ضخم للغاية، من مليون، مليونين، 3 مليون نسمة إلى تقريبا 20 مليون سعودي. فأصبح النفط يعني يا دوب يغطي الاحتياجات وطريقة الحياة اللي تعودنا عليها من الستينيات والسبعينيات والثمانينيات وطالع. فإذا استمرينا بنفس الحال ما في شك مع نمو عدد السكان بيأثر هذا الشيء بعد 20 سنة أو 10 سنوات على مستوى وجودة الحياة اللي تعودنا عليها لمدة 50 عام. فهذا يعني خطر رقم واحد. بلا شك احنا كلنا كسعوديين نبغى نحافظ على نفس مستوى الحياة، بل بالعكس نطمح ليه أفضل وأفضل مع الزمن ونستمر في النمو. فهذا جانب نريد أن نتفاداه في المستقبل. ناهيك عن خطورة أنه يكون اقتصاد المملكة العربية السعودية يعتمد بشكل رئيسي على النفط، وما يجابه النفط في ال4 سنوات، في 40 سنة أو 50 سنة القادمة من تحديات وقلة استخدامه، وقد تكون أسعارها أقل على المنظور البعيد. قد يكون في خلل في الوضع الاقتصادي في المملكة العربية السعودية، مما قد يؤدي لتبعات اقتصادية ومالية على مستوى الفرد والوطن يعني لا تحمد عقباها. فهذه حاجة رقم واحد. الحاجة رقم 2، هناك فرص كثير جدا في المملكة العربية السعودية في قطاعات مختلفة غير القطاع النفطي، في التعدين، في السياحة، في الخدمات، في اللوجستيات، في الاستثمار إلى آخره. فرص ضخمة جدا حتى لو كان ما عندنا مشكلة في الجانب النفطي لا يزال يكون هناك في حماس ورغبة ودافع قوي جدا لتحقيق هذه الممكنات اللي نطمح أنه نستفيد منها كسعوديين ولوطننا الغالي. فأعتقد أن هذه دافعين رئيسية لعمل.
So again, you see the tapping on the demands of society, tapping on the demands of youth, and also the kind of narrative that I talked about earlier,
رؤية
shifting the
2030
foundation day,
لكي نزيد
shifting to a new national day in the foundation day from the 1744, where we looked at the religious political alliance, to 1727, which was the beginning of the reign of its founder, Muhammad bin Saud. So the visions, targets, of course, there are plenty, but one of the very pertinent ones is unemployment, with unemployment being a very, very huge issue for the kingdom. And when we started at 2019, I think it was close to 14 or 15%. And this has been reduced now, based on the stats for the final quarter of last year. It's been reduced to 7.7%, which is nearing the vision's target of. So the 2030 vision is a roadmap to a post-oil economy. And I think you saw the clip earlier that, they do not, well, the kingdom and the crown prince plan for the future is to increase non-oil income. And the revenue should not only be relying or over-relying on oil, but also tapping on other areas where the kingdom has selling points, which include mega cities, giga projects, and attracting tourism, which has been one of the biggest drivers of Vision 2030. If you look at how they have progressed, tourism in their national development plans was only mentioned once in the National Development Plan of 2011 to 2014. And, it was not really featured in any of his previous plans until the Crown Prince took over the reins in terms of taking charge of economic transformation. And in 2020, you have, by royal decree, finally an official Ministry of Tourism. So, as I said, although religious tourism has tended to form part of its GDP and the revenues that come in, non-religious tourism only came in pretty recently. And of course, the other vision's targets are to incorporate women into the workforce. I think in my first opening session, we talked about some of the social reforms to bring in women, to relax guardianship laws, and we'll see that in the table later on. But incorporating women in the workforce, now we are seeing 36% of women in the workforce, which already exceeds the vision's target of 30%. And of course, the emphasis is on increasing capital, especially non-oil. And finally, moderate Islam that we talked about earlier. So tourism, I think I'll leave some seconds to digest this, but I think it's very clear on the left chart that we can see Asia featuring as one of the biggest crowds of international visitors to Saudi Arabia. What is also remarkable is that domestic tourism has also picked up pace, and it has reached the levels of 81.9 million local visitors, and it's a 70% increase from 2019 figures. Of course, we talked about religious tourism, but now non-religious visits are highlight, and they are putting a huge bet on tourism with 1.5 trillion invested in 255 projects. And the ambition goes further to welcome 150 million visitors, both domestic and international, by 2030. And of course, we talked about the visit visas being introduced in 2019, but only officially kicked off after COVID. So this has resulted this has heavily impacted the balance of payments. A decade ago, travel account was in deficit about 10 billion. In other words, Saudi residents were spending 10 billion more overseas than non-residents were spending in the kingdom. But by 2022, this has swung into a surplus of 10 billion. And in addition to this, Chinese tourists, as of this year, July, have access to easier travel to Saudi Arabia, and China in general was given country approved destination status. Of course, you see the emphasis of looking eastwards and emphasis of looking towards Asia. So with the focus or emphasis on tourism, you have giga projects. And of course, giga projects done that do not only entail just tourism, but also for living. And this is part of the report, and I think you can also look it up. It's by a consultancy called Knight Frank, and they do excellent work on the Middle East and North Africa. And you see that, you know, in Riyadh, there's a number of projects involved, including infrastructure projects such as Riyadh Metro and of course the upcoming Riyadh Air. And you have Riyadh being the site of mega events such as the upcoming Expo and the Sports Boulevard. But that also means that the internal migration to Riyadh is going to, it may overburden, you know, the city's infrastructure. That's one thing. And it also inflates the housing prices in Riyadh. But we will come to that as a sum up by the end of the presentation. But Western Saudi Arabia, and I think you've seen earlier in the presentation that the kingdom is trying to, of course, promote other areas other than its capital city. You've seen not less than 17 giga projects happening in Western Saudi Arabia. Some of the notable ones include NEOM, Red Sea Global, and Al Ula. And these are also going to be lifestyle destinations as well as historical destinations that tap on prehistoric Arabia, such as the one on top. So it's almost reimagining one of the sites in Saudi Arabia as, you know, being close. I guess the closest we can say is Petra, if anyone of you has been to Jordan. So these are the trending mega infrastructure projects that you have. They're all ongoing and they're part of Vision 2030. And if you look at the latest IMF report, you realize that there is also considerations for recalibration, because some which are slated for completion by 2030, they feel that they need more time or they need more finance to roll out this, finish or complete this project. And the priority sectors, I think if you look at it, of course, energy still remains high priority sector. I think my colleague will cover that in one of the next few sessions. Downstream energy in particular should be a focus, which means that refining capabilities, petroleum refinery capabilities will be one of the top priority areas. And this is slated for 2024 to 28, part of the kingdom's plans. But interestingly, metals and minerals, because that's where that's one of the resources that the kingdom has in the central part of Saudi Arabia. And they have started a Ministry of Industry for this purpose. And there are 30 exploration licenses rolled out. And if you were there also for my first session, you will also know that plastics, the manufacturing of plastics is also a huge sector in Saudi Arabia. And of course, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the figures for the Sovereign Wealth Fund, but these are 2020 statistics. This may have changed slightly, but it's interesting to note that SoftBank Vision Fund, it's has been given significant amount of this investment, and I think this was also partly because the head of SoftBank courted Saudi Arabia alongside other partners such as Apple to invest in new technologies. And the PIF is of course responsible for state investments, and that includes the buyover of Newcastle United, if some of you are following the sporting arena. And also we will talk about China later, but these are the areas as well that Saudi Arabia is looking at. Now, we can't talk about economic transformations without the accompanying social reforms, which is why, of course, if you talk about the business environment and whether this is a conducive place to live, and you will need to know about the reforms that are ongoing. And the first session, this table was produced and to show the kind of reforms or legal reforms that were rolled out by both Saudi Arabia and the UAE recently. And of course, that also means that there is some form of regional competition going on. You have Saudi Arabia introducing what they call Project HQ, which means they want to encourage companies to put their HQ in Riyadh, as opposed to, for example, Dubai. So there is, in tandem with those kind of programs, there is in tandem with those programs, the legal reforms to make living much easier, if you like. So that includes the reforms to male guardianship, to the sale of alcohol in the diplomatic quarter. And of course, is Islam still a bedrock of Saudi society? Yes. We talk about moderate Islam, but they are trying to push forward, like I said, to tone down on that ultra-conservative version and to promote a more moderate version of Islam. And if you look at the surveys and if you look at Mark Thompson's work, you realize that in his focus group discussions, religiosity still comes up. It's number one, and most young Saudis still feel that spirituality and personal faith give them a sense of purpose. And if you look at this survey results, and survey asks, we should listen to those among us who want to interpret Islam in a more moderate, tolerant, and modern way, you realize the respondents, about 25% still strongly disagree. So although those who have somewhat agree and strongly agree have increased, from 2021 onwards, those who strongly disagree still remains consistently a sizable portion. Now I will finish the presentation with this concluding slide, and we have one last clip to put everything together in terms of economic priorities and the sectors that are being developed and invested in Saudi Arabia. But I wanted to reiterate the fact that what the Crown Prince has done is to renegotiate the social contract and to look at the demands of the youth in a region where taxation is frowned upon. He has introduced a 15% VAT, and this is obviously not, I would guess, not exactly welcomed by the entire population, but that is also one of their revenue streams. And what they need to look out for, and we talked about the urban belt, a lot of the developments going in that middle portion of Saudi Arabia, they will also need to look at a more equitable development across the whole kingdom. It can't just be in the middle, and you need to prevent a kind of poor periphery polarization. Capitalizing on the demographic dividend, that means to really tap on the human capital of Saudi Arabia and the youth. And if you ask, and I have asked some of the Saudi youth, they would say that, if we have an efficient public transport network, we will take it. It's not demeaning to us, it's not beneath us. Use those networks for mobility purposes. And if you have been to Riyadh, you realize the traffic is an issue, especially running from the airport to the city center. So this kind of infrastructure projects will, of course, provide a lot of breathing space for people to move around. And then intergenerational equity. I think that was something that was brought up in the latest IMF report, which really means that does the kingdom have enough savings for the future, for the next generation, to have a good quality of life for the next generation. And especially if we are focusing on the youth, this should be a priority. And currently they said, or the IMF report says that there should be more saving. The reserves are adequate, but saving should be prioritized for the kingdom. And finally, we talked about regional competition, especially with the UAE. So I won't go into that. But the last part of the slide is on recalibration, which is also another observation by the IMF report saying that, some of these, they have so many giga projects, but they need to be more realistic about the targets, need to be more realistic about investment. Of course, NEOM and the line is one of them. It's a huge project. But then, of course, we have the Crown Prince coming out to say that there will be another vision plan coming up to recalibrate and to take note of these hurdles and what we can do to be more realistic. And so we should also expect that, sometimes a policy is rolled out, but there will be another second follow-up announcement to adjust or refine policy. And so I think we end off with one clip, please. So this clip comes from a series called the 2030 podcast. 2030, of course, drawing a direct reference to the vision. And it's
hit 50%.
It started by, so this is quite a good resource if you're looking at sectorial knowledge of Saudi Arabia and the areas that you should be looking out for, whether it's real estate.
Tourism market at the moment is last year we had about 77 million domestic trips made. So right now the biggest market source market for tourists are Saudis themselves, who are eager to explore the country and see what the latest new project is that the government has unveiled. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we've currently got about 320,000 hotel rooms that are planned or under construction, due to be delivered in the next 6 years. And for context, today, Dubai has 154,000 ready hotel rooms, which is higher than London or higher than New York. So we're talking about building basically double the number of hotel rooms that Dubai has in Saudi in the next 6 years. That is a significant amount of hotel room supply. And about close to 70% of that falls within the 4- and 5-star category. And for us, a really interesting area of opportunity is, we know from the World Trade Organization, to run a 4- or 5-star hotel room, you need between 1 to 2 staff per room. So very roughly, we're talking about creating between 200 to 400,000 new jobs in the hospitality sector alone, which gives you an indication, again, of the size of that sector, purely 4- and 5-star, and its potential contribution to future economic growth. But sort of going full circle and bringing it back to real estate, the big question is, where are all these people going to live? They certainly can't afford to rent, and they certainly can't afford house prices where they are today. So a big area of opportunity that we see in the market is around what we call key worker accommodation. This is not labor accommodation. This is accommodation for your housekeeping staff, your chefs, your receptionists, your bellboys, your concierge guys. And we have examples of that type of accommodation elsewhere in the Middle East, and it's a great investment grade asset. Yields can be as high as 10%. It helps with staff attraction and retention. They get free transport to and from the hotel. They get their linen changed every day. They get access to communal facilities. It's a really, really investor-friendly asset. And right now, we're not really seeing developers in Saudi tap into that segment again of the residential market. And again, here I'm only talking about the hospitality sector. There's obviously the retail sector and other sectors connected.
So I think you can see that although there's geo projects, there's tourism projects, there are areas where it's more to be done. I think they talk about key accommodation for key workers, those who support hotels in retail sectors, and that actually yields 10% of returns. So I think this podcast will actually, if you're looking for sectoral knowledge, specific sectors that you like more advice or I guess highlights from, I think this podcast actually does really well in co-hosted by Saudi and that area. So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, Dr. Clements. Obviously, it's a very interesting presentation. I did learn a lot, but I would take a pinch of salt from learning about real estate from a very specific consultant. Usually when you look at, I'm not trying to teach them, I'm just saying in general. Generally, when you look at hotels and all that stuff, you look at room per key. You don't look at it by the thousands of rooms that's going to come up. I mean, I have no real knowledge about what is the room per key previously. And as Dr. Clements might have just passed very quickly about what he was saying, Vision 2030 was initiated in 2016. And obviously, the whole world suffered through COVID. And that kind of plan would have been sort of delayed somewhat. And suddenly, you have such a big transformation that starts to really take shape in Saudi Arabia. So I'll probably say there's a lot of things to go on. Next, we'll probably start with some Q&A. Maybe I'll start off with one and the rest of the audience can think about the question you want to ask.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The futures veer very much towards tourism as one of the key pillars of Saudi's move away from oil. And you showed a chart which had the statistics for tourism. Now Saudi has the monopoly on religious tourism, but I didn't see a breakdown of that between those going for Hajj, etc., versus some guy from France who wants to have a nice week-long holiday, because that's going to be critical, because that's not the monopoly.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a very hard ask. I lived in Dubai for 8 years, and trying to get people to go to Dubai in summer is not easy. So what is that? What's that proportion look like? Is it still 90% Hajj, 10% other?
Thanks for your question. If I didn't get the statistics wrong, non-religious tourism, I think it's at the moment is about 80 million, and actually the Hajj part is only the small. I think in total it's about 105 at the minute, which they exceeded their vision's target, and it's only about 20 million that belongs to religious tourism. Of course, it's still a sizable amount, and it contributes to the bureaucracy, because there's a huge and established Hajj bureaucracy that they have put up to welcome pilgrims every year, not just for the main event, which is the Hajj, but also for the lesser pilgrimage, Umrah. This will still be, in a way, an income generator. That's number one. And number two, it will be a sort of a way to show political legitimacy in the Muslim world. I mean, they are the custodian of the two holy mosques, and of course, and they would like to keep that role. Yeah.
So what's their position going to be? Because Dubai is fun. It's fun if you're young and single. It's fun if you have families. Europe is nature. Saudi has some good nature in the north. So for the non-religious traveler, even the non-Muslim traveler, well, what is its position as a tourist destination? Because 320,000 hotel rooms, that's a lot of hotel rooms. And yes, it will require accommodation, but you need people to fill them. And before you get that, you need a reason for them to go there.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. And I think that's what they have been marketing, which is to say that there are diverse regions in Saudi Arabia that each has its own unique characteristics. You have the Red Sea Global and the West, where they try to put it as a resort, coastal resort, lifestyle destination. And then, of course, you have Riyadh, and we have mega events where they are trying to show you that there has been some form of social relaxation. I think in my opening session, we talked about K-pop concerts being held in Saudi Arabia. We've also seen a mega events such as Riyadh Expo, and also they've won the bid for the World Cup in 2034. So there's much to be done, of course, but there's progress. But that's the kind of diverse offerings they're trying to promote. Of course, these things that do not happen overnight. But the point they're trying to say that we are moving, and of course their neighbors are wondering whether they are moving too fast in too short a period of time, as opposed to, for example, what the UAE has experienced, where they've done it over a few decades. But the current Crown Prince has a long runway. He's still Crown Prince, and of course he's slated to succeed the throne, and he's only 39 years of age. So that's where all that recalibration, taking a more measured approach is coming in addition to, of course, fine-tuning the economic policies that are being rolled out. Yeah.
And home leverage with what we say on tourism. In many undoubtedly, components, there are a lot of infrastructures being built, but there are other choices other than Saudi itself. Of course, even choices to buy would certainly be a much choice destination for tourism itself. So that's all. Yes, I think infrastructure is important, but beyond infrastructure itself, do you think they really have a differentiation factor against the countries that are surrounding Saudi itself? And actually, because Saudi have Mecca, Medina, four religions privilege for their Hajj and the Umrah itself. So that itself can be seen as largely more of a religious initiative. So, when you have things like that, for tourism itself, usually some of them will try to share the religious benefits. How are they able to actually get that backwards or beyond the rest of the Middle East country? I think the rest of the Middle East also adopted same tourism as one of the existing, but to change the mindset, the travels both on leisure and business is not as simple as it seems. It's not just about infrastructures, organizing events, So, what do you think in that unit?
Okay, thanks for your question. I think the differentiation, I think from a policy point of view, and I can think from the leadership's point of view, they would like to keep the religious role, as I mentioned. Okay, I'll just get on with it. So the differentiation between their religious identity and, of course, selling an identity that is more socially liberal, I think that's something that all the states in this immediate region share. And you're right that they have, everyone else is doing the same thing. So what makes them stand out? I think for me, number one, I think we talked about the demographic dividend. If you go to Dubai, for example, I'm not sure if you would see an Emirati, out in the streets pretty easily. You might see in an office, maybe in the IFC, in the financial center, but I don't think you'll see them outside of those areas. What you see in Saudi Arabia, I think, and that would constitute a major selling point, is that you see Saudis everywhere. You see them driving the Ubers, and you get to interact with them. And I think where you want to put national identity also as a priority in your policies, you also need to think that and change the mindset that people want and should interact with non-nationals. And identity, as far as I understand, is also something that the UAE is grappling with at the minute, because they have rolled out their golden visas, they rolled out their citizenship granted to foreigners on a case-by-case basis, which is a novel policy in the region. But then they also ask themselves, when I grant a foreigner Emirati citizenship, would that person know the traditions and the know-how and the social customs of being Emirati? That's something they are grappling with at the moment. And in Saudi Arabia, they are tapping on various aspects of that Saudi identity to promote themselves. Of course, mega events and all that are very common in the region, but you talk about prehistoric Arabia, you talk about Diriyah as an integral part of Saudi identity. I think those are the areas they are trying to focus that, yes, we are changing, but we would like to keep this kind of aspects of identity intact, and also use those as major selling points. So I think in this respect, I think this is the approach that they're currently taking, that also the fact that they are bigger countries, so they are able to sell the unique selling points of different regions in Saudi Arabia, as opposed to, for example, the smaller countries smaller in size than them in the region.
I think this perhaps leads us to think there's clearly some misconception international people tend to still have about Saudi Arabia, even as it's transformed. And again, you know that the transformation has been very dramatic, very fast and very rapid. There's still a lot of things that are still going to go through with respect to the social reform, the cultural modernization. Perhaps there's a few points that you want to quickly touch on regarding the misconception that perhaps you think international people still have before we move on to the next question.
Yeah, so I think the common misconception that lingers is still about that is still upholding an ultra-conservative version of Islam, which is the Wahhabism that I mentioned about. Things have radically changed. Of course, Mecca and Medina are still the holy sites, but you'll be surprised that the number one destination, internal destination for real estate investment is in Mecca. Interestingly. And also the fact that some of the things that I highlighted earlier, that you have lavender views, that you have, winter landscapes, those are also things that they should use more to show that it's more than the barren brown desert landscape that we are also always used to thinking about. And another point I wanted to make is that they are also rolling out, before I make that point, but the point on Islam is that they have moved to change some of the laws legally, including personal status law, and if you talk about business, they have just introduced bankruptcy and civil transactions law, so that these do not, come under the Sharia law, because they want to make sure that they are going towards an internationally operated business environment. So they have moved towards the area, and these kind of the things are some of the aspects that people should find out a bit more, or people should travel to the kingdom to find out. I think if I talk to some of my Saudi friends, they always say you just have to come and figure out for yourself. I think the first trip is the icebreaker, if you like to put. But they've also introduced 5 different types of premium residency visa. But I think that needs some fine tuning, especially if you want to be a real estate kind of investor, have the real estate investor visa, because you need to have 4 million riyals, I believe, to get the visa, and you need to own properties without debt or mortgage again. So that's going to be difficult. But some of the things require some fine tuning. Yeah.
Just want to add to his data point. I just quickly checked out. We talk about as if they're spending so much trillions of dollars. Saudi Arabia net to GDP, debt to GDP in 2022 is only 16.1%. The GCC countries are about 40%. Of course, United States is 120-something%. Just to give you some perspective that yes, there's a lot of infrastructure overspent, but they are in no way behind in terms of payments. The gentleman, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. My name is Thomas Nigerian from the Ipon School of Public Policy, and I just want to move away from the tourism and economic diversification issues for a moment. And just if you could talk a little bit about Saudi Arabia's position in terms of international politics and diplomacy, and of course the tensions in the Middle East area. If you could talk a little bit about the trends there and what you see coming in the future, how Saudi Arabia is going to manage a very difficult region for international relations. Thank you.
Sure. Well, that brings me back, I think, more into my area of expertise, I think, or a strict area of expertise. I think, Saudi Arabia, I would say, on all of its qualities, is a deserved middle power. It has the size, it has the resources to be deployed. And right now, they have the willingness. If you think about the United States, pre-1945, they were operating on isolationist policy, refusing to put their hands to meddle with things in international politics. But Saudi Arabia, under the current crown prince, is looking to develop a kind of outside diplomacy where they not only want to be a diplomatic leader in their own region, but also outside of the region. And they've played a role and showed that they want to chart a course where they can make their own policies without coming under pressure by external powers. If you look at the relationship with US-China, they have been hedging between the two. China has a significant amount of investments, and bilaterally in terms of if you look at the stats, the economic footprint is there. And there's been investments in areas such as solar panels, EVs, petrochemicals, and of course, China is the top energy importer. So they have been playing a role to the balancing act, and but they of course are aware that the US remains an important security guarantor for the region. If you talk about conflicts in the region, I think the Crown Prince has all along come out to say that regional stability is a prerequisite for national development. And that's quite important, because then they are trying to solve things diplomatically in the region. Whether or not they succeed, the report card, I think, will be mixed at the minute. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Clemens. Since we already mentioned a little bit about China-Saudi relations, I'd like to ask, do you think there will be an alignment between the Belt and Road Initiative and their 2030 vision?
Thanks. I think there's already been synergy in that aspect. I think not just about the investments that I talked about, but also digitalization. Digitalization is one of the high priority sectors that was in the slide earlier. Huawei, for example, has established, I think, 5G cloud region in Riyadh itself. So yes, that's part of the digital BRI. And if you look at other investments, there are also infrastructure investments in ports, especially. And they have also co-developed petrochemical complexes, the two countries. I think these are all significant talking points in terms of the BRI success in penetrating the region since 2013. So yes, there are cases of these. Thanks.
I thank you, Clement. I have a question regarding the mining and mineral sector. Whether you think that can transform into a significant economic contributor, what are being done now in terms of exploration, can it develop into a sizable export and manufacturing sector? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head for mining, but it is a high priority sector, as you saw earlier. I think the fact that you have a Ministry of Industry and a Minister of Industry, Bandar Khoreif, who was just recently here in Singapore, and he was looking at also logistical sectors and among other things. But yes, minerals was one of the top priorities, which was the reason why this ministry was even developed in the first place. And things like copper, zinc are all part of the transactions that are in the charge of this ministry. And yeah, I don't have the statistics on the back of my head, but yeah.
Okay. Given that there's an equal amount of ladies in the attendance, I thought I'll just ask Clement's question about gender inclusion. How do you see gender inclusion policy evolving over the next few years? And clearly, what impact will it have on the Saudi economy?
I think I mentioned very briefly in the presentation, but I'll say two things. One is that they've successfully brought in the ladies into the workforce. They exceeded their vision's target of 30% to hit 36% of women in the workforce. And they've also introduced female leadership in government sectors. So that's a highlight. What we should also remember is that there are still, of course, traditions and social mores on the ground that need time to change. And if you travel to Riyadh, you will see we talked about the relaxation of male guardianship laws. These have changed. You see women out there having a picnic in the park and all that, but they are still very much fully clothed and dressed in their abaya. So this kind of social mores will take time to change, but they have started. And I think that's a good thing. And if you talk about but one more thing is also the emphasis in the region as a whole, not just Saudi Arabia. The emphasis on masculinity. I think we look at the Gulf societies as very patriarchal society. The ruler is of course a male and it's a monarch that passes down the power from one father or to a son or to a brother. So it's pretty much a paternalistic society, and we should not also forget that these kind of things also should be taken into account when you talk about social change.
Just on what you were saying about changes for gender, does that then mean that it could be another 1 or 2 generations for female entrepreneurs are able to walk into an office building in Riyadh, meet a room full of gentlemen, shake their hands, and sit down and get into business?
Thanks for the question. I think it's a very important question, and it could well be. And I think if you look at their neighbors who started much earlier than them, even their neighbors have nationals who are females who struggle to, from social pressures or family pressures to even shake a hand at the workplace. I think it's ongoing debate, and that's why I think national identity is something that should be discussed and ongoing. I think the youth population will have a different mindset and changing mindset, but you have a huge youth bulge in Saudi Arabia, and it would take probably 1 or 2 more generations to see fully the transformative changes that have been started now. And that is why I think it's a positive thing if the ruler remains the same, and he has, of course, tracked his own trajectory on the office policies to see where they have done, the targets they have met, and what more can be done. And of course, the part where I mentioned about the urban belt and then the rest of Saudi Arabia, I think that is something where the leadership also needs to think about, where you can't just develop only that belt, that portion in the middle. You need to be thinking about the rest, because if you don't, plan an equitable project for the nation, then you risk leaving the rest behind, and with that, you leave people stuck in limbo elsewhere. Yeah.
Perhaps I'll just maybe ask on behalf of people here who are in businesses that we might find quite interesting. Of course, we've talked a lot about the economic transformation in Saudi Arabia and what we are going through socially as well. What do you say are the top three, perhaps immediate opportunities that entrepreneurs can focus on in the next few years if they are thinking about exploring or even expanding in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's probably the most direct answer is to just based off the slides earlier, tourism. I think the biggest one, and with tourism, you are linked, of course, with hospitality and real estate. I think these three go in tandem pretty much. Now the one thing that I think would be also a game changer is Riyadh Air. Riyadh Air will of course bring about the connectivity that Saudi Arabia needs to the rest of the world. The two neighbors who have major airlines that actually serves as hubs for travelers are Qatar Airlines, Qatar Airways, and Emirates. And if Riyadh Air enters the market as a competitor, I think this will be a game changer, but they will face stiff competition, of course. But that will mean that, we will see more direct flights from Saudi Arabia, from the kingdom to elsewhere, and Riyadh being used as a transiting point. And they are also developing that new airport in Saudi Arabia. So that could well be a game changer for travelers, especially it runs in tandem with tourism. Yeah.
And then you can hang around and ask. Probably, what message would you leave the audience with about Saudi's future and, again, opportunity that it presents really for businesses and individual?
Yeah, I think the message really is, I think there's still lingering, a great deal of lingering skepticism about the kingdom. I'm sure. I'm not. I'm under no illusions. I think the first thing is to go there yourself and see for yourself. I think as what they would say, but also I would say, we should immediately change the way you perceive or view things in the kingdom. The second point is that although there is skepticism, I think a lot of the indicators that we have seen from official reports are positive. There needs to be recalibration, of course, on giga projects especially, but by and large, they are going in the right direction. And the third thing is that I think the main takeaway is that they're now looking at Asia. I think that is a big thing. China, Japan, and Korea have come up tops as main Saudi export destinations. And you have seen numerous official visits from Saudi policymakers to Singapore. And we've all along been looking only at the issue of Hajj from the Singaporean perspective and to, of course, facilitate and increase the Hajj quota for Singaporean Muslim pilgrims to the kingdom. But now we are looking at other areas. And I think that is another sign that we ourselves wish to diversify the kind of portfolios that we have with the kingdom. So I think when they are looking at us, and we are also interested in them, I think that's where things will find a intersecting point to develop further. So that's my last message.
I would like to thank Dr. Clements for taking time to go through the presentation, share with us his views and his insight and analysis of the region. I would like to also thank Dr. Janet Stashaway for sponsoring the venue and been helping us through the 3 sessions that we had. These are definitely very exciting time for NUS and the Middle East institution with so much interest in Middle East, economically, socially, politically, a lot more things we can learn from you guys. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Dr. Clements. Thank you.